Well, my name is Norman Katz, and I am president of CATScan Incorporated, founded in January 1996 and located down in the South Florida area. My background is I graduated from university as a as a business major, also with a computer information science degree, so I combined them both together. And I started my career, I guess it would be about 28 years ago. I really started off as a programmer, worked my way programmer, analyst, systems analyst, and IT manager, and had the opportunity to work for some well-recognized consumer product companies. And then in late 1985, through a series of happenstances, I decided to go off on my own, and I started CATScan in January 1996, specializing in my core expertise areas of ERP systems, barcode labeling and scanning applications, and electronic data interchange. And through networking and meetings, I met a private investigator. I became a Florida licensed private investigator around 1997, I would say, about a year or two after I started. And then around the time of WorldCom Enron collapses, I became a certified fraud examiner, and have also added certified fraud specialist designation and one or two other designations. So during the time that I was studying for my CFE exam, back about 7 years ago, I came up with the perspective of supply chain fraud. Basically looking at all the frauds that were being described in the study manuals from a supply chain perspective, not from a financial auditing perspective, which is the way the materials presented it. And the core foundations, if you will, of supply chain fraud detection and reduction are to get transactions from paper to paperless. Not that paper isn't still important, but there's a lot of paper-based transactions that need to go to paperless, extending the ERP system through EDI and barcode labeling and scanning, and now we've got all this data together, and we need to close the gaps where fraud can exist and fester. So I look at the supply chain as something not just external to the walls of the organization, it happens within the organization, and so my supply chain fraud model looks at a seamless, just inbound and outbound supply chain, and also closing the gaps where fraud can exist, specifically in getting paper-based transactions paperless and doing a lot of cross audits and checks. So I hope that sums it up.
And why is it important to pay attention to supply chain fraud?
Well, certainly supply chains are stretched globally right now. And so organizations can't put their fingers on their suppliers or what their suppliers are providing very easily, because everything is stretched, not just domestically, but also nationally, internationally. Also, a lot of fraud is perpetrated within the organization. So the frauds where companies are hacked and millions or tens of millions of email addresses or identities or tens of thousands are stolen get a lot of play in the press. But realistically, employees and even valued consultants and valued suppliers, once they're inside the protected infrastructure, they can wreak as much havoc internally as hackers can do from external. So the supply chain from an internal-external perspective needs to be addressed because this is about internal controls as much as it's about risk management from suppliers and even customers, from entities that are outside of the organization.
Do you have any examples of fraud that take place in the supply chain?
Well, there are some very good examples that I've used in my recently published book, Detecting and Reducing Supply Chain Fraud by Gower Publishing, which was released in August. But the one that really rings true to me, and I think it's just a great example, is the pet food scandal that happened several years ago, where pet owners in the U.S. purchased pet food, and their pets got very sick and died. So what happened? The pet food originated in China and was tainted with melamine, which is a chemical that is used to artificially to produce artificial results with regards to protein levels in food. Now, I'm not a chemist, but from what I've read, this is what melamine is used for, is that it will artificially boost protein levels when food substances are checked. So the other reason why this is going to be a great example is because here in the United States, we certainly like to point our fingers at China and say, gee, it's the Chinese that are guilty of so many things, and it in no way could it be us. But here's what happened. So yes, the pet food was tainted in China, and the conspirators were caught. One person was found guilty and possibly executed, and another person, when found guilty, I believe committed suicide. So the perpetrators were caught, but the story does not end there, because the pet food product was shipped to Canada to a company that private labeled pet food for distribution under many brands in the United States. And the question here is, why didn't anybody in Canada, why did not anybody in the United States think of checking and doing their own quality testing? So apparently nobody in Canada thought to quality test the product that was coming in from China, and nobody in the United States, from any of the companies whose brands were on those labels, thought of opening a can or opening a bag and doing quality testing to see if any foreign substances were present. Now, Sanlu Dairy in China suspected that their products were tainted, and in fact sent samples to a Chinese laboratory that determined that there was a foreign substance, which later proved to be melamine in dairy products. And this was a global concern, because a lot of companies were buying the dairy products or in liquid or powder form. So we have the technology to test for a foreign substance and then determine what it is, but nobody in Canada or the United States thought to do this. And so you can look at this and say, well, supply chain fraud certainly happened in China, but I can certainly present the case to where supply chain fraud would have happened in Canada and the United States if costs were cut by executive management to the point to where quality testing was either not done or was perhaps made impotent because of pressure to get throughput done, because of poor sampling or poor equipment that was used, or not the right equipment to truly test for foreign substances. So I think that that's a great example. Those are two great examples, because it starts to give us a different definition of what possibly could be fraud. It's not just tainting food product, it's also potentially by executive management who says, we're not going to fund good quality testing because we want to keep cost of goods sold down and increase stock prices, make our financials look good, and so we all get bigger bonuses.
And thank you, Norman. Do you have any final recommendations for supply chain executives?
Well, certainly, and my book does go into this, certainly governance and ethics come into play quite a bit. this definitely starts at the top and has to trickle down from executive management who say, we are going to do the right things all through our organization. Auditors may find it, and risk managers may find it difficult to police an organization in trying to enforce certain types of internal controls. And what I would say is that instead of trying to police an organization into risk management or internal controls, there needs to be a level of collaboration, which may not exist today at a lot of organizations, between internal auditors, risk management, and the supply chain professionals that are handling technology and operations internally and externally. Because the same types of technologies and process improvements that can get our organizations running more efficiently, more effectively, greater throughput, can also be used to help detect and reduce supply chain fraud. So it's interesting that the more data that we collect, the more we have an opportunity to detect fraud earlier in the supply chain, or red flags that could be fraud earlier in the supply chain, that before they manifest themselves into something much worse. And again, this gets down to the better collection of data at all the points in the supply chain, and then cross-analyzing them.
And thank you, Norman, for sharing your insights on supply chain fraud.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Dustin.